Chair.
Hi, welcome to our session, No Justice Without Knowledge. We're starting in a couple of minutes, so bear with us. And perhaps if you're sitting far away, come and sit a bit closer.
We might as well get started. I would like to invite all of you to move 2 rows to the front. This reminds me of the days when I used to lecture and students would sit at the back of the room. Thank you, thank you. That feels much more comfortable. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Heide Hackman. I am the director of Future Africa, which is a collaborative research platform at the University of Pretoria here in South Africa. Yes, come closer. Come closer. And I am joined for today's conversation, and we're going to keep it as a conversation, right? By 3 wonderful people, experienced open sciences. Professor Jean-Claude Bergelman. Jean-Claude is a professor of open science at the Free University of Brussels and now editor-in-chief stroke director of the Frontiers Policy Lab and Frontiers Planet Prize, which I'm sure you've all heard about. He will tell us more about the lab. Dr. Chiamo Mochegwa, who's director of the African Open Science Platform and engaged as an advisor on open science regionally and globally. Ms. Ellen Thies, or is it Thies? Thies, who is Senior Director of Library and Information Services at Stellenbosch University, past President of the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, and currently still chair of one of its advisory committees, right? So thank you all for being here. Welcome to you. Thank you for joining us at the end of what I understand has been a hard day, a long day. Let me try and very briefly, just in a few sentences, sketch what I think the focus of this conversation is. Tiama, I'm not sure whether the African Open Science Platform still uses this slogan, but I remember when the strategy was developed, we said, open science is about the future of science and science for the future. If you think about the context for the global context for science and the demands on science, the state of the world that we are in, the reality is that that future has to happen now. It has to be our present. I think we've made the case for open science. I'm sure all of you here are open science advocates. And I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of awareness building still to be done, but generally the case has been made, the UNESCO and more broadly in the Global South. And I think that takes us to the heart of the implementation question. Current research assessment reform process that the European Commission has. Is that reason for hope?
Depends. I spent 10 years in policy making at a relatively high level in Brussels, and my experience is that, and that's a bit what I think, I start again. So the whole move for changing the research assessment, I support 100%. The fact that as a scientist you only accounted for what you publish in high impact journals is ridiculous. I'm not saying, I'm not despising it. It is significant, it's important, but it should not be your only measurement. Okay. From that on, what the Commission is now supporting, and which, by the way, started in my unit, it was one of the last things that started, and the way and the shape it takes, I think they try to do too much. And they try to change, to bring in open science indicators, to bring in more qualitative indicators, to bring indicators about impact and so on, to aggregate all that so that they can substitute now the dependency of the high impact factor by a new factor. Now my experience is that if you try to solve too many things in once, you solve nothing. If you combine too many things, so I would advocate an approach which is concentric. You start by changing where you can change. For example, an open science indicator I can develop tomorrow. I mean, not me, but we together, it's very simple. So many downloads, so many reuses, so many data, so many open source, so many times my algorithms have been used, so many open peer review. I calculate it, I see the impact, and I have an indicator for my open science. So if we already would agree on that, we add it to the high impact factor. Then we go to societal impact. Then we go to policy impact. There, I think that's the road to follow.
Great, thank you so much. Chiamo, AOSP was set up to get all of this right at a Pan-African level. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the AOSP and practically your plans, the obstacles for rolling out open science in Africa?
How much time do you have?
10 minutes.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm just excited just sitting here. And yesterday I was taking copious notes when the president was talking. I got my 5 points. I wonder if anybody remembers them. Top of them, he said, what role should science play in enhancing human dignity? Very, very loaded statement. And then he says, how does science enable a just and climate transition? And we saw in various presentations that issues of climate change affect Africa disproportionately. And then he talked about how do we ensure Africa's science is recognized. There is a lot of science happening in Africa. There is a lot of studies happening in Africa. But how much of it is visible? And how much of it is traceable to the scientists and researchers and data collectors and data stewards in this continent? And then he was asking about what role does science play in multilateralism? I think obviously there he was alluding to science diplomacy. And if you look at the definition of science diplomacy, you see two definitions. One talks about development of infrastructure to get us to collaborate and have joint action over obviously global problems. And one obviously talks about collaboration between borders vis-a-vis getting us to work together between science enterprises. So those were loaded statements. The very last one, he says, how do we transform the nature of the scientific enterprise? Now, as the incoming director of AOSP, this was music to me, because I'm thinking he's laying out at a strategic level what the African Open Science Platform has to be addressing in terms of it to be relevant to Africa. Colleagues, AOSP provides us with a tantalizing prospect for developing a platform in the continent to allow us to combine our efforts, to allow us to stimulate interactivity, to allow us to obviously go further together in terms of us even identifying problems that are of continental importance and then working on them together. It also allows us to develop a commons in the continent, such that with that commons, in addition to solving our problems, we can also obviously take part in solving global problems. I want to share with you a number of things. First of all, we have a strategy for AOSP that identifies a number of pillars. The first pillar that has been identified, and I think is pertinent to discussion today, is that of infrastructure access. I happen to have studied in England for both my undergraduate, my PhD, my postdoc, and worked there. And coming back home, like most scientists, you'll find that access to infrastructure to enable you, what you've been trained to do, is one of the stumbling blocks. And more often it's tempting to pack your bags and go back. That is called brain drain, isn't it? And that is something that we need to also address. That how do we create infrastructure to allow our scientists, who are otherwise well-trained, to do their science in the continent? So to answer your question, moderator, that's the first pillar that I think we need to address, doing science in the 21st century amidst digital technologies to allow our scientists to do what they do best with these enablers. That is the hard infrastructure. We had a very good session this morning. It's a whole day session on the other wing of CITC regarding operationalization of UNESCO recommendations across the different areas. And one session that I was chairing was on infrastructure for open science. The NRENs were there, the National Research and Education Networks. Beyond providing connectivity, they're going to be providing additional services in terms of data centers and the like. So on that pillar, ASP will be working hand in hand with these service providers to make sure that we got the environment in terms of infrastructure to allow our scientists to do their science here. That is the hard infrastructure. And then, of course, in terms of the soft infrastructure, issues of research data management. I think this is key. When you talk of artificial intelligence and all this, it premises that you actually have the data, quality data. That talks to research data management. Therein, the problem of making sure that we professionalize data stewardship, because the quality of data depends on some of these issues. So the issue of research data management, with all that it entails, is a key element for AOSP. And then the big element, big elephant in the room. Have we put in place policy frameworks at a national level, at institutional level, to guide us in all these areas? Jean-Claude mentioned the issue of incentives and the natural tension that happens between individual researchers thinking about their performance management or their performance enhancement or how they get promoted in terms of where they are in the academic system. We know that our institutions are not configured properly, and their reconfiguration will depend on the policy environment that is being developed both institutionally and nationally. So for ASP, this is a key issue. How do we assist the evolution and the reconfiguration of our institutions in this new dispensation? So this is quite important. And maybe coming back to the issue of research data management, there is a lot of efforts. I see colleagues here who are very active in this Quora yesterday, talking president to president. Saying, he was two requests. I'm sure you had all those requests. What is important, we need to be talking to our policymakers. Granted, they are juggling a lot of things, but I think it's important for us to communicate the value proposition of open science very vigorously. I happen to be an academic who has lost a number of years of publications because I wanted to go engage government. Every time I engage government officials, they actually want to listen, but they also want to own the agenda. So I think we need to be purposeful and directed, be directive in terms of communicating the value proposition. I think maybe Jean-Claude has got something to say about this. Yeah, I think it's very important.
Alan. Jean-Claude?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, Tiamo, because we should not forget that an open science system is not a system on top of what we have. It substitutes what we have, which means that there is money in the system that we will use in another way. The transition will be costly and will require an extra effort, but it is not an effort on top of all the rest. It is an effort that is an investment to get more out of it in the future. Let me give you a concrete figure. I mean, sorry. So when I was in Brussels, so we did a calculation of the cost of not having open data. The opportunity cost, meaning what you would win if you would have it in terms of being able to reproduce your science and do other things. The cost of that was calculated 10 billion euro in Europe alone. That was in those days still Europe 28, Brexit. Huh? And then we did another calculation, but that we didn't publish. We asked also to calculate the opportunity cost of the spin-offs that could be expected, so the innovation that can be expected if those data would have been openly available. And there, the study came up with a figure of 17 billion, but there was euro per year. So it is a cost, yes, but it's an investment. And that's a different way of approaching it because you get more out of it and you use the money that you put in your system anyway. So the value proposition is to be very sharp there, that we are not creating another layer with a big building and 15,000 people that have to work in it to make it a caricature. We are making the system much more productive.
Right, Ellen, I have heard, and whether it's true or not, that in the implementation phase now of the UNESCO process, that higher education institutions are not adequately involved yet. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from you about what's happening at Stellenbosch universities, and is it a lonely road for the library, or is there a broader institutional adoption of open access, open science principles and policies? Let's take it from there. You've got the mic.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Well, I'd like to answer the question more by probably looking actually at the national landscape. Stellenbosch University in particular it is very different in the sense, firstly in terms of just our research output annually, which for the last few years have been sort of the top research output per research at an institution. And then the uptake at Stellenbosch University, probably when we look at open access publishing, has actually been above the international average, whereas based on Scopus data in 2021, Stellenbosch researchers have already been publishing open access in more than 60% plus. Now, the reason I think why that is perhaps not the norm in South Africa is a large percentage of income that Stellenbosch University receives comes from contract and grants. And because of the funder requirements for those grants, the researchers do not actually have a choice. They have to publish in open access platforms. But at the same time, of course, they're also struggling with funding. But what I would much rather look at is the sort of the case study of the South African Library and Information Consortium, who originally, the members consist of all the higher education institutions as well as the research councils in South Africa. And originally it was established to negotiate subscription licenses for subscriptions. However, as we've heard from our two other speakers, as in line with the goals of open science and open access and the various international initiatives over the last decade and a half, if not more, South Africa and SANLIC, of course, also started to move into that direction. And then, therefore, for the last 3 years, had also embarked on negotiating transformational agreements in order to increase South Africa, and in a sense, of course, we also speaking, I think, for many other African higher education institutions to follow a suit. So we were very deliberate in terms of saying that we are setting negotiation principles that the publishers need to adhere to, that we are not just going to follow what happened in the global north, but that we have to look at the context of South Africa and Africa. And that was that the whole, so I was very excited when I received the invitation, and of course the theme of this forum this year, talking about social justice, because we were very different from what had happened with the negotiations to increase open access in other parts of the world, the core principle that we were looking at was social justice. And we were sure that there needs to be a national strategy to align that with a national strategy to accelerate the growth of South Africa's research. So we wanted to make sure that it's not just about the finances, it's not just about paying less for what we're paying, but that we wanted to have a holistic development that includes inclusive of peer review opportunities, constructive development of manuscripts via the review process, and then also the preparation of editors for the introduction and management of new journals, etc. And that the negotiation process must be inclusive of socio-economic conditions and issues and the growth of the country's research agenda. So when it comes to the implementation from our side to accelerate this, we had listed a number of issues that were key for that implementation to take place. First of all, that because we're this part of the world and because of how much we, or the lack of perhaps our contribution to global research for many reasons that we all are aware of, it is important for us to maintain, to continue to maintain still or improve read access to scholarly information. Because part of why our research is not so accessible and why our research are rejected is because we do not have access, and many times to our own research. So that is a key issue. And then some of the other issues really is around that we want to have the ability to publish full and immediate open access in the venue of choices. There is must be a containment of reduced cost. Inclusivity and social justice must be core. And then we felt that the alienation of the global south need to be stopped. We also felt very important that a different set of principles to make African and South African scholarship more accessible and more, the dissemination thereof, more affordable. Already we cannot afford half of what we have. We know we have a decline in our purchasing power. So when we then compared, or when we started to negotiate, we compared what we are being charged for now, or what we're being offered for transformative agreements in terms of read and publish, and we found that the global north have been offered much better agreements than what they were offering us. When on top of that, that we have evidence that we pay a much higher cost per article than the global north. So in order to transition to a new model, therefore requires, first of all, that we want to contribute to science on an equal footing, and linking on to what Jean-Claude had said, and in fact, we said this to one of the publishers when we negotiated, because it felt like they were doing us a favor by what they're offering us, even though it is worse than what they offered others. We told them we are not asking for favors. We are asking for fairness. That's what we're asking for. And that we need to look at what we're charging. Again, Jean-Claude referred to that. It's an equal amount that should be provided that we have the same income. So we cannot, because we don't have the same income, so we cannot be charged the same and say that we charge you equally what we charge people in the UK or in North America. And then we also said that we want more access than what we had previously enjoyed. That is what the new model requires. And then unlimited publishing rights in hybrid journals. Linking to your question, or addressing the other part, is are the libraries going alone at the institutions? There's a lot of education that we have to do. Just today, we had a meeting at Stellenbosch University, and some very senior academics were saying, but, you know, still referring to that there are some of these journals, open access journals, are inferior. It's a poor quality. And as I'm trying to explain to them, no, that's not the case with all the journals that are out there, that these are the top journals and the top quartile of journals. So we have to partner with and educate at the institutions. But at the national level, as part of the strategy of SANLIC, we have identified those partners. So we are working with the Association of African Universities. We have liaised and had actually asked for support from the Deputy Vice Chancellor's Forum. We had the CEO of the University South Africa to write letters of support, which we had submitted to the publishers, and we said this is what they actually asking us to do. And we keep telling them, if you don't do this, we have the support, forget about it, we are not going to negotiate with you. I'm not going to speak about the cost because in terms of the time, but, and some of these have already been addressed. I just want to say that what we absolutely do believe that in terms of the core areas of negotiations that we have put out from the library point of view is that we have to, it has to lead to the growth of African scholarship. There we had proposed development programs. We're also asking that we need to reward peer reviewers through automatic APC waivers for African peer reviewers, and that we have, again, the indigenous knowledge part, we're asking for recognition of locally published titles, and that we want them to establish development or local collections. And lastly, I think for us, why it is difficult and why we just don't seem to fully participate yet internationally and in terms of UNESCO, etc., because the challenges we've heard, but I just want to say again, the biggest challenge is that facing cost. The second one, the financial barrier to participation. Also, one publisher noted that the rejection rate of papers of South Africa is very high and concerning, and indicates that researchers may require more development. So, what we really need to consider, and this is just in conclusion, that by making, first of all, that we regard, and libraries for that matter, and in terms of open science, that we are active participants in the social justice arena. The role of libraries, academic libraries in particular, in social justice, have of course now been given more prominence by our open access initiatives. By making research from academic and research institutes freely available, Open has great potential to facilitate collaboration and partnership to address societal problems, again, as we've heard. So currently, most of the research that's been published is commercialized, giving rise to unequal access to information between the rich and the poor, in particular, particularly between the global north and south. In terms of implementation, in terms of the approach that we have taken, we can say there are signs of very good, of successes. If we stand together, and if we, from the global north, we have talked at other forums about that, whether it's a global fund, but that when each country negotiates, that we try and negotiate on behalf of all the other countries. It's the only way that we would be able to fight the publishers. We have noted of those transformative agreements that SANLIC had already signed, that the early evidence indicates that transformational agreements have already been highly successful in terms of accelerating the growth of South Africa's open scholarship. So we have moved from a situation in these venues where over 90% of the output was published in the subscription model without author rights retention, and with only 2% of articles published in hybrid journals. And because of these transformational agreements now, in 2 years, we've seen that it's now a situation, and I just want to repeat, previously 90% of the output was published in the subscription model, the paid model, and only 2% in hybrid journals. Now, we have a situation where only 19% of the output is now published in the subscription model without author rights retention, and with 81% of articles published open access with author rights retention. But to get here, we had to push very, very hard to say we cannot accept to continue to pay, and that in the future to pay the same fees, the same rates that you charge in other parts of the world without taking into consideration ours. So really, if we want to really participate and fully participate in open science, the only way for Africa to do that is that we should be able to have platforms where we remove the barriers, where we can publish our research, where we can make it freely available to society and not just, of course, to universities. Then I think we can get somewhere. But it's a hard choice, but we're pushing hard, and we do have the support of the institutions.
Fantastic,
to do so.
wonderful, really dismaying in some ways, but also very hopeful. Thank you, Ellen. And I assume this now leads to a partnership between SANLEC and AOSP, right? Good. Colleagues, let's open this up. It's a conversation. You've heard a range of issues, as I say, both hopeful and in some way dismaying. Thoughts or questions? Yes, I've got... we're going to need microphones for you, I think. I'm also happy to do... Thank you very much. So it's this lady in front, and then I'm going to come to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Saad Suleiman from the Sudanese National Academy of Sciences, and I have been involved in a lot of reviewing and applications and trying to help our young researchers to publish their papers, either locally or outside. Locally, most of them, they didn't want to do it. They always ask for high impact journals. Nobody wants to publish in a local journal. Then we got to the system of promotion of researchers in the universities. It is in the system that if you have papers that you are submitting for the promotion published locally, you will get a lower number in that, while you will get a higher number of credits if you publish in international journals with collaborators. So with the high number of universities now popping up in many private, mostly on public, most of their accreditation for promotion, they follow the system of the mother university, which is University of Khartoum, and it has it in its system. This microphone.
It's closer. Bring it closer.
It has in its system that the the researcher should have a larger number of papers published, in international journals, while small number in the local, so as to activate the university journal itself. So with this large number of journals that have been created, it is not good research that is being submitted for publishing under the university's system, and not even in the mother university. Because most of them, they think that their research is good, and they are always looking for international journals. But how can we get them understand that publishing in your local journal, it is a credit for the university itself, for yourself, and it will help you, help the researchers to move on, to develop their capacity towards, creating good science. And if you publish a good paper locally, then next time you will try and do it in a better way. So our researchers themselves, they need to be, educated. They need to be helped. And we need to have a system where not every university should have its journal. We can strengthen 2 or 3 of the journals in the senior universities, and then attract the research from the other universities to be published in that university journal. Thank you.
Good. And I would also say, we focus a lot on publishing papers, but what about other outputs? It's also part of the discussion, should be at least, right? Over to this lady in front here. And then, did I see another hand?
There is another hand from here.
Oh, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. But might take a round of feedback in the meantime.
Thank you. I'm Marina Kuklina from Moscow, from the International Center for Innovations for Science, Technology and Education. I can see different sides of the medal. Yeah. So on one hand, one of the tricky things with the open science, the same what's going with the internet right now. We have so much news going all the time and all the time and all the time. It's growing enormously, and sometimes you're lost. And what's happening with the young scientists, and especially children at schools, which is very difficult, is that sometimes they're difficult to differentiate where exactly is the correct information, true information, false information. And one of the concerns that I have with the development of the open science is that at some point, with the amount of information, with the less opportunities, possibilities for doing proper reviews with this amount of information, that going through the articles, we start losing the point where exactly this is the scientific results you can trust, and this is something that you cannot trust enough. And that's, I think, something which will be a big question for us in the near future, and how to overcome this. Going on one hand to open the possibilities, I think that we need to give, especially for the young scientists, to give an opportunity and provide support for doing this, but on the same time to make sure that we protect the science from going a lot of articles that we cannot trust, or articles or any other information which is growing at the same time. And from my point of view, we have sometimes the same question for the universities and for the countries. You cannot measure in the same country as in our country, in one place, in one city, you have one kind of salary of the scientists, and you go to the other part of the country and you have completely different parts of the salaries. So we cannot have the equal measures of the economic part, even in one country. I'm not speaking about across the continent or across the world. So from my point of view, the support has to be infrastructural, either in the country or across the continent, for example, through the foundation, as you providing the support for the young scientists. And at the same time, I know helping with some of the reviewers to give the correct to give enough to do the review and to provide the sometimes, especially with the multidisciplinary scientific article, where you have physics and chemists and biologists working together. It can be so complicated that one review is not enough. Yeah, just to get depth, because the knowledge getting into the article is too complicated even for one reviewer to go further. And at the same time, we think there is the science does not differentiate in terms of the male or female or any other things. You have good science and you have bad science. I think this is something we should aim at everywhere across the world. That's my point. And just one question always intrigues me. I have heard about a lot of important things for Africa, but it's never mentioned as a priority, the research in agriculture, and I'm intrigued why. And that's in the agriculture research. You always climate and all, but agriculture research, from my point of view, should be really crucial for Africa as a whole. But it was never mentioned anyway.
Another session, another time. Okay, so what I'm going to suggest we do is we just continue, because these are comments, they're not all questions, and then you can decide. I'm going to come back to each of you. You can decide what you pick up on, what you want to respond to. Is that fair? Then we can but I'm going to ask people to keep it a little bit shorter. Feel free to comment or ask a question, but be concise, please.
Thanks. I'm Mattia Vaccari, and I'm the e-research director at the University of Cape Town down the road. I guess I have a comment and a question. So. Researchers have historically been prone to publish in high-profile journals whenever they could, and that is continuing to some extent. Of course, there are incentives related to career. There are incentives related to promotion and where you are based, and so on and so forth. But I think the key metric from the university point of view, or from the Academy of Sciences point of view, will be how much does it cost for us to publish our research, and a lot of people from Blue Skies Research will tell you that today it shouldn't cost you a penny to publish your research. So are there incentives to try and make the cost of publishing lower? And is open access actually helping, or is it actually making the problem worse? In South Africa, we have a feature of our funding system that rewards researchers on the basis of their publications. No questions asked. Well, yes, there are some lists of journals, but you get 100,000 rand for every paper that you publish per year if you're publishing a single author. So are there similar incentives or disincentives that we can put in place in order to make the publishing more sustainable? Because people will tell you that we need more funds to make our data open, not so much our publications open.
Thank you. So we're going to go here to the front. You had your hand up to it there, and then I'm going to come to you. And you, Abila.
I did not finish my notes. Nina Sartori from Germany, Federal Ministry of Education and Research. I'm not a specialist in open access because those are my colleagues from the other department, but I was reading the German strategy parallel, and I did not understand if there is a national strategy for South Africa on open access, because while reading the German one of our ministry, I thought, okay, the problems are mostly the same, even on quality and even on financial issues. And DFG, our NRF, came in with a post-grant fund, and our ministry as well funds all ministry-funded projects, have to have a clear commitment to open access and then publish in that manner. And yes, my question is there a national strategy dealing with that? But I think this helped a lot. Then SGCI, isn't that a topic for them, or probably is already? And then we have another thing, the innovation agenda between the European Union and the African Union. And there the open access topic is also on the issue. And the African Commission should be very strong on that. And there should be a common common deal on that. Because one last point, because we have a national strategy on open access, and this is about publicating internationally, and science always must be internationally, but this strategy does not mention the international dimension.
Yeah,
this is always this thing, and it's good always to come on the governments and ask for it. What is it? Thank you.
Colleagues are going to correct me if I'm wrong, but the South African open science strategy is currently undergoing cabinet approval, right? And after Mr. Ramaphosa's comments last night, it's looking hopeful, I would say. Good. Thank you for that, Nina. Let's go to the two gentlemen at the back.
Excuse me, thank you. My name is Dimitri Martinez from MCM Digital Media. My question stems from the idea that open access is not just sort of scientist to scientist, but rather including scientists to the public. And I was wondering whether it's a communication problem or a science problem that we're dealing with. In other words, are we talking about a shortage of journalists that are proficient in science matters, that are able to, promote, a material that they find? Or is it about scientists that perhaps can be developing some communication skills and maybe using social media to promote their science? So it's really, I guess the question is, what role are we looking maybe for journalists to specialize in science matters? We don't have many. I'm just talking about South Africa right now. We don't have many journalists that specialized in particular areas. And perhaps that might be something that one could look at.
Nice question.
A small link. It just occurred to me while the lady from Stellenbosch was speaking about the whole issue of cost, etc., that there seems to also be a need for some policy coordination here. There was a whole furor around the Copyright Amendment Act. And it seems to almost go completely against everything we're saying in terms of open access. But maybe that was a bit of a throwaway.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Gentleman behind you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nkululeko Makwaza. I have comments and questions. The first comment I want to mention is by the gentleman who was talking about funding, to have our own funding as open science. I don't think you should shy away from that. So you say it and then you swallow it, because it should be on the list, top of the list of it will solve a lot of problems if we have that. Just a comment I have for you. As for the lady from Stellenbosch, the librarian, I'm a librarian too. I don't understand librarians sometimes, even though I'm a librarian. We have open softwares, right? And we want data to be open. And we also complain about funding as librarians. But we find ourselves not using open softwares. We want to pay repositories, yet we don't have fund. And in the long run, we'll be having problem of funding as we pay them. I don't know how we do that. I would like you to comment on that. And also from my gentleman on the side, that the issue that we cannot, people who advocate for open access, they're not policymakers. We need to find a way to convince policymakers and institutions to have a buy-in or to make policy for open access. How do we do that? Thank you.
Okay, so I've got 3 more questions, and then I'm going to give each of you 5 minutes. You can't answer all of it. Okay, so 2 questions there. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, and I'll try to keep my question short and simple. Just to also confirm that the National Open Science Policy is going through government process at the moment for approval. I'm Adrian Tiblady from the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory. A very quick question. So, can you comment on the potential incentive framework that would change research culture? Because I think a large part of this, and many comments have been raised from the panel as well as the audience, that a large part of the challenges about adopting open science and open access is around research culture. and it's around the incentives that are created, and those are financial incentives. But there are other incentives that we must be considering, because it's also part of, it's not just a national research culture, it's an international research culture, and how we do our research and how we make our research available. And you commented it as well, we should be looking at things beyond just publication in journals and utilization of altmetrics and things like that. So wouldn't mind getting a view from the panel on that, and commenting beyond just the financial incentive frameworks that are established through the universities and government departments.
It's a big question, culture.
Sorry, I know it's a challenging.
No, it's a good one.
It's a challenging question, but it's
Vanessa.
Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa McBride from the Office of Astronomy for Development and the South African Astronomical Observatory. And I think my question also touches on a similar theme around research culture and a bit about gatekeeping and unconscious bias in publication in the Global South. So I'm, in changing this research culture, what are the thoughts around, an open review model, because that, has the potential of, almost reviewing the review, and it also has a potential of creating some incentives. So.
Thanks, Vanessa. And finally, at the back, Abida.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Oh, awesome. Abida Dawood from Future Africa, University of Pretoria. My question is, sorry, I'm quite new to this topic of open science, so it might be a little bit basic. I've just published a paper with colleagues from Canada, and they also said, sorry, can't afford it, the open access. So I think just one point is not only the Global South that's struggling with those issues. I think it's across the board. There are many academics all around the world that are struggling with this issue. But I think what I really want to ask is, if I'm now this academic at the university, where do I go? How do I get support? Because, yes, I agree, you're saying that there's something coming, but what is in place at the moment? Because certainly at my previous university, even some of the senior research chairs were struggling with the issues of what it costs, with the issues of the incentives and the model of assessments. Please, if you can just tell us what is in place at the moment, or how long is it going to take? Not to sound too impatient. Okay. Thank you.
So thank you all for those comments, observations, questions. As I say, it's not possible to resolve them all, even begin to answer them all. So I'm going to let you choose which ones you want to respond to. Jean-Claude, over to you.
Okay, so I'm always tempted to answer them all, but let's try to. Yes, no, I think one way of resolving all these questions is to look at it from a long-term perspective. I do think, and I cannot know the future, but I do think that many people think so, that we are in the middle of a system change in science. It's not a linear change. It's not incrementally doing things a little bit different than last week and last century. We are going to a fundamental new way, a fourth paradigm, some call it the fourth paradigm, of data-driven science, where everything will be data-driven, where machines will write half of our articles and do most of the number crunching in 10 years, where we create streams of knowledge rather than individual articles with individual stars. Now, if you accept that, the debate becomes completely different, because a lot of the debate about how are we going to do things is because we try to keep the system as it was and try to force it in where it has to go. But if you accept that we are going to a new way of doing science without changing the fundamental thing, which is peer review, it becomes much easier to look at all this in a creative way. Because journals, I really think that in 20 years' time you will have maybe brands, platforms, but I see journals disappearing because I don't need to be honest, I don't need journals anymore. I have my ways to find what I need to read, and I'm no longer going, let's take Nature or Science. I no longer go to the library and sit there and during a day scan the last editions. I have a completely different way to know what I need. I know where I can find the data, and I know how to number crunch it because I have the platforms available. If you accept that, and you accept that we are in a system change, I think it is easier to solve the questions because then it is an investment. Now, I think to pick one of the questions is that, to change, what is the key incentive to change the research culture? Well, the key incentives is that scientists see that the new system or the system change will make their work more interesting, more productive. And linked to that is the esteem of the peers. That's very important. And thirdly, money. So if you want to change the research culture, you need to work with convincing them, evangelizing them that a data-driven knowledge stream type of science is a much more interesting way to do science than it used to be in the last century, combined with not touching on the peer review system, because peer reviews is recognition, which is essential because you do it for recognition and for being Einstein, which we don't manage to, but anyway, we try to. And then thirdly, money means career and funding and so forth. That is what changes a culture, and that's where I think we should work on, and that's relatively easy to do, but it needs, you cannot, one university, one continent, one country cannot do it. It should become a global discussion.
And I actually want to take the liberty of adding just something to that. You know, for me, what is also problematic is that it's fine to have a national open science policy, but we also have a national engagement policy, a strategy. And actually, if you look at national science and technology policies more generically, we are not yet at the stage of science as a global public good. It's going back to a point you made in your introductory remarks. National science policy is still about national economic growth and competitivity. There's the problem. The culture shift has to start at that level. Ellen, I'm going to give you your 5 minutes because, Chama, if you go over the time, we can all stand up and say, okay, time up.
Okay. Yes, so I'm just going to address two of the questions, and the one that was specifically referring about the problem that you have with libraries. So first of all, I want to say that absolutely not the case, and I can speak here for Stellenbosch University, but also for other university libraries. First of all, we use for most of our services outside the main services, we use open source. We had developed the skills of our staff, and we would only if it's something that completely does not work, then we go for something commercial. But it does differ from institution to institution. Further than that, when it comes to open science, open access publishing, support for open access funds through the licensing that we had for the subscription model and the initiatives of the libraries in what we're negotiating, we have saved the country millions of rands in order to facilitate and improve access. Where a university, prior to us having a national license to that subscription, some universities would never have been able to afford to have access to basic scientific information in order to do the research. So we had really, and the proof is there. And we're taking that now through in terms of open access publishing. In terms of the deals that we have already signed, we already will be saving the country now in article processing fees close to the first 6 agreements, probably around $2 million US dollars. We're in the process of finalizing agreements with we've already done it with one of the top 5 publishers. We're in the process now with the other 2 of the other top publishers. If we are successful, which it looks like we're going to have a deal, And it's not a deal that they've made in many other countries. It's the first time that they're going to do this. Because we told them, you do it, otherwise you go. Again, in the case of Elsevier, it will mean that the publishing that we would be able, our researchers would be able to publish free of charge. They're not going to pay 1 extra cent to publish in Elsevier's Science Direct journals. Springer would be the same. The offer is unlimited. So it also going to mean, in terms of the value, and this is what the libraries have been doing. We had some help with DVCs as well. But we will be saving the country and institutions, again, probably around $7 million in paying for article processing charges. In terms of where do we find the information and where it's available, I know some universities, like the University of Pretoria, they have actually listed all the journals on their library website to make researchers aware in these titles you can publish free of charge. So there are various ways that information is being spread, but certainly your research office or your library specialist, you can contact them and they would be able to guide you. Others have created LibGuides also on their website that shows you how and where and you can actually do that. But it is ongoing. New researchers come and they don't know about these things. So I think we will increase our effort. And as you've indicated, Heidi, immediately said to me something like an engagement program. That we need to do a lot more to make people aware that they have these benefits and that they can make use of it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ellen. Have you got a microphone, Shamo? You don't. Who pinched yours? Okay. There we go. Over to you.
While he's bringing the mic, I can so that.
All right.
I think this was an excellent question, Heidi, from the audience. I just wish we had half a day to unpack them, because I think they go to the core of the discussion. I think the gentleman there did notice my trepidation in sort of going for the full, but you are totally right. The issue of investment in science and research in Africa, we all know. AU set 1% GDP at some point into research. No one. I don't know about South Africa, Susan. No one. Even close. Yeah, so this is something that we know is a challenge. And then again, I was just trying to err on the side of say, look, how do we build a case? I think that's a commitment. Even at SADC, there was even an ambitious. I come from Botswana. Botswana was looking at the 4% was very ambitious, but they're not even there, I think, long term. So the issue is important. And I think the issue that was raised about science communication, maybe Vanessa, you'll recall our conversation, was it 2018 at the Science Forum South Africa, on the panel that I chaired on science communication for public engagement and science communication for policy engagement. And how many times do we see scientists at prime time on TV communicating science? I think COVID changed a lot of that. And I think if you look at the statistics, I was just looking here earlier, 70% of all scientific publications are locked behind paywalls. 70%. 85% of COVID-19 publications are open access. That COVID changed a lot. Here's another stark statistic. 50% of all publications in climate change are still locked behind paywalls. Very, very critical statistics there. So I think coming back to your points, I think you're spot on. I remember when I was in high school, there was a book written, Scientists Must Write. Scientists must communicate. And I think every scientist really from early on must be trained, not just to communicate in terms of scientific writing, but also scientific communication, because I think that is the core. And then again, journalists. How many newspapers have got an article on science, maybe somewhere at the front or at the back, on common issues that may be of interest to society at any given time? I think COVID changed all that. All of us were beginning to be scientists who understood the modalities of herd immunity. because somebody communicated the fundamental science that was done so that the public can understand. And why do we need to be 2 meters apart? Or why do you need to quarantine for 7 days? So I think COVID taught us that we can do better in these areas. The point that you are raising is pertinent. What are the priorities for Africa? Which is related to the point that I was raising, that AOSP will be endeavoring to help us coagulate and discuss and prioritize. And how good would that be for us to go and engage policymakers about what the national priorities are? I've just been on a retreat of the Southern African Development Community region where the executive secretary took his SADC staff to a retreat in the middle of Norway and said, between now and 2030, we've got a deadline for the SADC Regional Integrative Strategic Plan. What are the priority projects? Unfortunately, they brought in experts, international cooperating partners. It was very, very enlightening as a scientist listening to them talk. And of course, us engaging to say, look, project X, Y, Z is in line with open science. And you'll be surprised how much you can get from that dialogue. Indeed, we can help prioritize by engaging policymakers. I'll make one statement. A similar conversation was had some years ago with intellectual property. The World Intellectual Property Organization was helping organizations and institutions developing IP policies. Again, we're talking about open science policies today. I remember the consultant, a veterinarian from Malaysia saying, you Africans, don't try to do what the rest of the world is already doing. Why don't you look and say, this is our competitive advantage? And he gave an example. He goes, 100 years ago, the English took the seeds of palm trees to Malaysia, 100 years ago. Today, Malaysia has got a full value chain from palm trees, palm oil, pharmaceuticals, you name it. They got the seeds from Gold Coast, Ghana. Ghana is a net importer of palm oil today, 100 years on. And it goes to the point that you were raising. Can we prioritize areas, including agriculture, and then we develop value chains along those so that we can harness the modes of research? So really, I think there's a conversation that scientists and policymakers have to have. But my experience is we need as scientists to be in the table, wearing those suits, getting rid of those genes and everything. Just go to the table to know what the priorities are. Very, very quickly. Maybe to round up, Madam Chair, as a scientist, I think the professor there mentioned this. We write papers, we do research. And guess what? We review the papers as well. We don't get paid for reviewing the papers. And we do peer review. And there is something wrong with this mix, I would say. So I think future deliberations on this to change things. Can we give back control to the academic system in terms of ownership and leading the publication process somehow?
Thank you, Tiamo. I'm not going to add anything else to that, any words of wisdom, but I do want you to join me in thanking Jean-Claude, Ellen, and Tiamo for a great conversation, and thanks to you as well for your engagement, for joining us. And Jean-Claude, do we all get a Frontiers Policy Lab cocktail function now?
It's open access. You go down. It's for free. There are no APCs. You don't have a subscription. And if you don't go, we will find you. So it is in the second building at the ground floor, Hall 5, in the other building.
Is it that way? The Convention Center 2, you go over the Sky Bridge, and then we can continue the conversation. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
You saw me nodding.
We are doing it.
I was wondering, I didn't ask the question publicly, but have you spoken to, I work for Frontiers, so, but there are other policies as well that have a fully open model. Okay, so we have a work stream for Africans. We have.
We're going to have a pie.
This is good.
That was good. You did.
Thank you, thank you.
You saved it, huh?